Welcome to ePathshala PG courses on computer science. Today we will see about the course web technology. In that course we will see about an important module called Java socket programming. See about the basics of socket programming that can be done with the programming language Java, and we will also explore about TCP sockets in this module. We will see what are the different classes in Java that supports or that would be used to build TCP socket communication between any two hosts. We will see small examples which describes about the TCP sockets. There are actually two transport layer protocols called TCP protocol and UDP protocol, which makes the communication between two endpoints. So, TCP communication, as we know, it is a connection oriented communication, or it is a protocol that is connection based, and it provides a reliable communication between two hosts or a reliable flow of data between two computers. Whereas UDP, which is an user datagram protocol that normally sends data as an independent packets of data. These independent packets of data are called as datagrams that would be sent from one computer to another computer, but there is no guarantee that whether this data has been arrived on the other end. So, we can say that UDP is not connection based, or it is an unreliable communication that happens between two end systems. So, it is not like TCP, which provides a connection based or a reliable communication, but this UDP is also required in many situations, or in very critical situations where we do not bother about the data loss, but we need to receive the data. Receiver or the receiving end has to receive the data without any interruption. So, this module will see that how to create TCP IP client sockets. As I told you, this TCP IP sockets are used to implement reliable bidirectional, persistent, point to point and stream based connections between hosts on the internet. And we need, in order to make this communication possible, we need to create a socket that would actually get connected to the Java's IO stream or Java's IO systems, through which it would get connected to the programs that are stored in the local computer, or it can be on any other remote system in the internet. So, we use a socket. This socket is a communication channel. It is a bidirectional communication channel through which we can actually send data from one end to other end. So, if you think or if you imagine that how it is created, or how the socket would be, is actually it is an combination, or it is a binding of this INET address or the IP address of some machine on the internet plus its port number. So, any machine and an application on an end system could be identified by its IP address of the machine and the port number of the application that runs on that particular machine. So, this socket actually builds the communication between two systems. So, any socket would bind an IP address with its port number to identify an application in an end system. So, this TCP communication, as I told you, this is this gives a reliable connection between two systems. Let us have it as a client and a server. So, in order to create this TCP sockets in Java, we need to create a socket, one for the server and one for the client. There are actually two entities for making this communication. One would be called as a server, the other one would be called as a client. So, there is actually a client server communication that happens between the two hosts who wants to communicate with one another. So, here in Java there is a class called server socket class. Now, this is actually designed to be the listener which normally waits for the client's connection to happen. So, this server socket is a class that we normally use with servers. So, if you want to create a socket in the server end, we need to make use of a class called server socket, and there is another class called socket class in Java. So, this is a class which is designed to connect to server sockets. So, it's happening from the client to the server. So, this socket class is normally for clients, and this socket class is the one which would initiate the protocol exchanges. So, the creation of socket object normally it implies that we are establishing a connection between the client and the server. So, in order to create this TCP sockets with Java, Java supports two kind of classes called server socket and the socket class. The server socket is a class that would be created in the server side, and the socket class is to establish the connection to the server. So, this socket class is the one which would initiate the protocol exchange. So, mainly we say that the socket class is for the client side and the server socket is for the server side. And there are two constructors to create this client sockets. So, we can see here there is a constructor socket constructor which takes the host name of the system and the port number. So, this would create a socket and get connected to the named host and the port which we are going to give in the arguments. And there is another constructor the socket of the socket class which would take an INET address object, and how to create an INET address object is the one we have seen in the previous module. So, here using an INET address object and a port number we can create a socket. So, the second form of the constructor socket constructor would take existing INET address object and a port number to make this connection possible. Now, let us see about the instance methods that are supported in the socket class. So, there are several instance methods, some are listed here. We have a method called get INET address. This would actually return the INET address associated with the socket object. So, once you create a socket object, you can use the method called get INET address, which would return the INET address that is associated with the socket object. So, if it returns null, then if the socket is not connected, this get INET address would return a null value. And there is a method called get port. So, this returns the remote port to which the invoking socket object is connected. So, it returns 0 if the socket is not connected. Get port would return the port number of the socket object to socket which is connected to a remote system. And then we have another method called get local port. This returns the local port to which the invoking socket object is bound. So, get local port would give the port number of the local machine to which the socket has been connected, and it returns -1 if the socket is not bound to the machine. And there are two streams we need. We need these IO streams in order to, once you create a socket, we need to make use of these streams, input and output streams, through which you can, or this would be binded with the socket to send some information between the two ends. So, we have an input stream and output stream in Java, and with the socket, if you want to create an input stream, we need to make use of a method called get input stream. And in order to create an output stream that is associated with the socket, we need to make use of a method called get output stream. So, once you create a socket object, use the method called get input stream that would return an input stream. So, we can see the method definition. Get input stream would return an input stream associated with the socket object, and get output stream would return an output stream associated with the invoking socket. So, once you get an input stream and an output stream, we can send data between the two hosts. So, these socket communication or the whatever classes, we have seen that there are two classes we need to make use of to establish socket communication or TCP socket communication between the two hosts. So, these socket classes are available in the package what we have seen in the last module, that is the java.net.store. So, the entire networking classes are available in the package called java.net. So, here we can see that it is java.net.socket. It is an abstraction of a bidirectional communication channel between host. So, now you can see how this we can send and receive data using streams. So, as I told you, we have two entities. One machine would be called as a client and the other one would be called as the server, and there would be an input stream and output stream associated with both the entities. So, you can see an input stream is for reading a data into the server and an output stream is for sending some information from the server. So, each of these two entities has to have an input stream and an output stream. We will take this client entity. This client system, it needs an input stream to read data from the socket, and in order to send data through the socket, it needs an output stream. So, we create a socket object using the socket class, and we use the method called get input stream and get output stream in order to get this input streams and output streams and to send information between the two machines. So, here we can see that how the socket communication is happening. So, we can see that a server program, we will write two programs, one a client program and the other one as a server program. A server program would run on a specific computer and it has a socket that is bound to a specific port. So, you can see here the server program running in one machine, and that program would create a socket, server socket that would be bound to a specific port, and the server would be waiting for the client to get connected to the server. So, the server waits and listens to the socket for a client to make a connection request. So, the client is one which would make a request to the server, and when it sends a request to the server, it specifies that through which port it wants to communicate with the server. Now, if everything this connection goes well, the server would accept the connection. So, once the client gives the request to the server with the specific port, and the server would accept this connection if everything goes well, and upon this acceptance of this connection request, it would create a new socket and that would bound to a new port. So, you can see that it would now create a new socket that is bound to a different port. So, now it needs, why it is going to create a new socket is it needs this new socket so that it can continue to listen to the original socket for connection request while serving the client, the connected client through the newly created port. So, now we have seen that how both of them are actually communicating, the server and the client are communicating. So, if you want to code it, if you want to write the server program or the client program, we need to follow these steps. The first step, we need to first implement a server program. When you implement a server program, we have to first open the server socket, which means that you have to create a new server socket. So, as I told you, we have a class called server socket, and data output stream and data input stream, these are the classes which would get associated with the input stream and the output stream of the invoking socket object to send and receive data. So, now the server when we are implementing the server program, we create a server socket class, server socket object, and we bound that server socket to a specific port. So, given the port number, we bound the server socket to that port number, and now this server socket would be listening for the client request. So, in order to make it listen for the client request, we use a method called accept. So, this server socket object is the server is an object of the server socket class. So, this server socket dot accept, which would actually return a new socket. That is what we told, that once the connection request from the client is successful, the server would create a new socket that would get connected to a different port, and through which the server would be communicating to the client. So, now this server dot accept would return a socket object. So, using the socket object, you will make a connection or communication with the client. So, now in order to create IO streams through IO streams, we need to send data and receive data. So, we have to create IO streams for communicating to the client. So, in order to create the IO streams, we have seen that it is a socket object dot, the method name is get input stream. So, using this get input stream with the socket object, we get the input stream of the invoking socket object, and use the method called get output stream on the socket object. Client is a socket object. So, you use the get output stream on the socket object, we will get the output stream. This is actually wrapped with these two classes called data input stream and data output stream, through which you are going to send data. So, this data input stream class or the data output stream class is for sending or writing primitive data information through the socket. So, now once you get a stream, we need to perform communication with the client. So, in order to receive from the client, we use a read line method of the input stream. So, the input stream object what we have created now is is. So, this dot read line will return a line which is a string, or it is a text, a line of text. And in order to send data to the client, we use the method called write bytes. So, it writes the bytes of this string to the socket, and it would be sent to the client. And once you make all these communication, we have to close the socket. So, the socket which we have created in this program is an client socket. So, we need to make use of the close method to close the socket. And to implement a client program, we need to make use of the socket class. So, in the server side, you are making use of a class called server socket, and in the client side we use a class called socket class. So, we create a socket, new socket, and we name it as a socket object. And when you create a client socket, we need to give the server address, that is the INET address of the server, and to the port to which the server, the port number where the server is actually running. So, you need to associate with the INET address of the server and the port number where your application is running on the server. So, we create a client socket and we try to connect this client socket to the server socket by giving the appropriate INET address of the server and the port number of the server. So, once you give this request, this would actually the server socket is listening. So, once you give the statement gets executed, the connection request is sent to the server, and the server would now create a new socket object. That is what happening. So, once a socket communication has been developed between the client and the server, we need to create the IO streams for communicating with the server. So, as we have seen in the server implementation, the client implementation also we use the socket object dot get input stream, and we wrap it with the data input stream to create the input stream through which you can read data, and then we use the method called get output stream on the invoking socket object, and we create a data output stream, and that would be the output stream through which you want to write data to the socket. So, input stream would be for reading data from the socket, and output stream is for writing data to the socket. So, in order to perform this communication with the server, you can make use of the methods that are supported by the data input stream class or the data output stream class, and you can send data to and from, you can send and receive data to the server. And once we have performed all these communication, IO communication, we can close the socket. So, this diagrammatically it is shown what is happening with the code. Now we have seen we have a server host and we have a client host. So, the server must be running when a client starts. So, first we compile both the server program and the client program, and we will first execute the server program, and the server would be running before the client starts. So, the server actually waits for the connection request from a client. And to establish a server, you need to create a server socket and attach it to the port number where the server would be listening for connections. So, this part of the code is what happening. So, you create a server socket and you make the server socket listen in the port number 8000. So, once the server is now waiting for the connection from the client actually initiate a socket creation. So, it makes the client issues creation of the socket object to the by making a connection to the server host and the port number where the application is running in the server. So, it makes a connection request to the server. This would be the second step what is happening, and after the server socket is created, we can see here this is the statement where the server socket is created and the server is using the statement to listen for connections. So, a server socket is listening for connections, the client issues this connection request, and once the server accepts this connection, a communication between the client and the server is conducted. So, we can see an I/O stream created between the client and the server, through which the client or the server would send and receive information. Now, the steps what we have seen in the previous slide, now it has been coded as a single program. Here we have a server program. Here we have created the server socket and make the server socket object dot accept, that would return a socket object, and we create the input stream and the output stream, and we try to read the information that is sent from the client. So, we use a method called read double. So, write double is a method which is used by the client to write a double value to the server. So, the server first reads the data that is sent from the client, and the server in turn is trying to write another double number to the client. So, the client has to read this. So, it makes use of the input stream to read the data that is sent from the server side. So, this is how a communication is happening between the client and the server. So, here the first two steps, creation of the server socket and the socket object, and creation of a socket object in the client. So, these are the important steps we perform to make TCP communication. The rest of all the codes are making an I/O communication input through input and output streams. So, this is a simple Java program. As I told you, we create a server socket in the port number 1234, and we make the socket to listen in that port number using the method called accept method. So, once client gets connected, this would create a new socket object, and we use get output stream to create an output stream object like S1 out, and we use we wrap this input output stream with the data output stream, and we create a new data output stream object, and we try to send a string using the method called write UTF, which is supported in the data output stream class, send a string to the client. And this is a simple client code. The client is making a connection to the server by creating a socket object. It gives a host name of the server, and it gives the port number where the server is waiting for the client request, and as usual you create an input stream through which you try to read the data that is sent from the server side, and it tries to print it in the on the console. And this is where you need to carefully close the data input stream, and you are closing the socket streams. So, this is an example of the server. Here you can see here we create a server socket and we try to read from the here we try to create an object to read from the keyboard. We also want to need an object to read from the socket, and we want to write to the socket. So, we make use of a class called buffered reader class to read from the keyboard, and the same buffered reader would be wrapped with the input stream of the socket object through which you will also read from the socket. And print stream is an class which is for writing, or we use the print method that is defined in the print stream to write data to the socket. So, we create three objects, one to read from the keyboard, from the socket, and the other one to write to the socket. So, you create a socket object and make the server listen in the port number for the connection. So, once the client gives the connection request, it starts reading. We wrap this input stream, get input stream socket, get input stream with a buffered reader to read from the socket. So, it is now trying to read from the socket. So, from socket dot read line, and the server is printing on the console, and in turn this server is writing something to the socket. So, it makes use of the print stream class, and it binds with the output stream of the socket class and create a two socket object and use the println to write a string called OK. So, here it is reading from the socket and writing to the socket in the server program. And similarly, in the client program, we have an object to read from the keyboard. We create a print stream object to write to the socket, and we create a buffered reader object to read from the socket. So, here this is where the client is making a connection to the server. We create a socket object, give the we need the INET address of the server. So, use the method called get by name, which I have already told you. So, INET address dot get by name, and we have given the local host which says that both the server and the client are running on the same machine, and we give the port number to bind it with the server. And in order to read from the keyboard, we take the standard input system.in, we bind it with the input stream reader and wrap it with the buffered reader, and then we try to get a string from the keyboard. So, once you read a string from the keyboard, we write it to the socket. So, after writing to the socket only, the server, we have seen that the server is actually reading the data from the socket. So, the client is the one which is first writing to the socket and the server is reading from the socket. In turn, the server is sending an OK message by writing to the socket, which has to be read by this client. So, we create a from socket object using this buffered reader. So, we get the input stream of the socket, wrap it with a buffered reader and use this from socket and use the readline method to read the data from the socket, and we try to print it on the screen. So, this is actually happening. We see the output here. The server is running, server 2 is running here and client 2 is running here. Server 2 would be waiting till the client makes a connection. So, the client once makes a connection, the connection would be accepted by the server, and the client is the one which is actually sending a message to the server. So, the hi message would be printed in the server side, and the server is in turn sending an OK message which is read by the client and it is printed on the client's console. So, this is a program for making a chat between the client and the server. The same way what we have seen, here we have made use of the buffered reader to read from the keyboard, from the socket and to write to the socket. So, we use out object to write to the socket. So, here you can see that we read from the keyboard, from keyboard is an object to read from the keyboard and we write to the socket. And the client chat is also, the client program is also trying to read as well as to write. So, here we too have created an object like from socket to read from the keyboard and to write to the socket. So, here too the client is ready now. So, it is reading from the keyboard and it is writing to the socket. So, both of them are making a chat. Here you can see that one is sending, the server is sending some I am ready now, and here you can see that the client is also ready now. It sends an information hi to the other end. From there you can see and how are you has been sent from there to here. So, you can also make chat communication between the client and the server. And this is a program which actually says about a transfer, file transfer between the server and the client. So, we create a file input stream for reading the file, and we create a file output stream for writing to the file. So, here you can see that in this code you can see that we create a new file stream, we open that file and we read from the socket and we are writing to the file. So, you read from the file and you are writing to the socket. So, server is actually sending the file to the client. So, the client actually gets, the example says that the client gets the file name from the keyboard and it sends to the server reads the file and sends the data to the client. So, the code you can see that the file has been transferred from the server to the client. So, here in this module we have actually discussed about the basics of socket programming. We have discussed about how a client server communication can happen with socket programming. We have explored about the server class, server socket class, and we have also seen some examples how a file transfer or a chat communication can happen with TCP sockets. Thank you.